But no mai haramai, kia ora ana, welcome. Welcome to this September edition of Pacific Storytelling. Pacific Storytelling is a cultural storytelling agency based in Los Angeles, California, enabling travelers to travel more responsibly throughout the Pacific. Our mission is to find those Indigenous voices and to amplify them to the North American travel market, but also the global tourism industry as well. I'm joined today by two very distinguished guests. It is my pleasure to welcome, firstly, my friend Christian Mani. I'm going to read your bio because it's very particular. Christian is the general manager for the Cook Islands Tourism based in North America. He is responsible for the promotion of the Cook Islands as a travel destination across both the US and Canada. Born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to Cook Island parents and raised in the Cook Islands since he was 5 years old. Christian has been with the Cook Islands Tourism since November 2010 and has been based in Los Angeles since October 2016. Kia ora ana, welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Renata, and thank you so much for having this opportunity to tell a little bit more about the Cook Islands, a little bit more about why you should go and learn more about our culture in the Cook Islands. So, thank you again.
Thank you. And also joining us today is a very distinguished guest, Tuatakiri or Tua Pittman, who joins us. He's got the most flash, as we say in our part of the world, Zoom background. He's currently Zooming through the Cook Islands as we speak. The Wi-Fi connection's pretty good, if you ask me. But to introduce Tua, he is a navigator from the Cook Islands who's led crews and navigated over thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean using ancient navigational techniques. These ancient navigational techniques are based upon the celestial bodies of the sun, the moon, the stars, as well as using the oceans, the flights of birds, and other natural markers to find their way. Tua is one of 10 Polynesians who currently hold the title of Master Navigator and has been at the forefront of the Pan-Pacific movement to revive traditional voyaging without instruments, plotted courses through the Pacific. One particular voyage began in the Cook Islands and actually ended up in California. I'd love to hear more about that one, Tua. When Tua is not navigating across the Pacific Ocean on traditional canoe, Tua is found aboard luxury expedition cruises such as Lindblad, Seabourn, and Silver Seas, sharing his knowledge of Pacific Island cultures with members throughout the world. A proud Cook Islander, Tua finds comfort in telling the stories of the Cook Islands, Pacific Islands, traditional voyaging, and highlighting the beauty of the islands we live in. Welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Kia ora to everybody out there. Welcome to the Cook Islands.
It looks very beautiful. It's a nice day down there, obviously. Christian is the general manager for the tourism board. Can you tell us a little bit about the basics for our international audience who may not have heard of, well, they may have heard of the Cook Islands, but don't know exactly where you are?
Yeah, and I think it's always the number one question, where are the Cook Islands? And geographically speaking, the easiest way to explain it is a lot of people in North America know where Hawaii is. So using that as a reference, I say we're on the same time zone as Hawaii. We're the same distance south of the equator as Hawaii is north of the equator. That kind of helps explaining what the weather is like, throughout the year, the water temperatures and what the air temperatures are. So most Americans have been to Hawaii. Those who haven't, we say we're in between Hawaii and New Zealand. We're a group of islands made up of 15, divided into a northern group and southern group. We cover a very large area of Pacific Ocean. It's around almost 3 times the size of Texas. That's how much ocean space we cover that's been designated for the Cook Islands. However, our islands are very, very small. The largest island, Rarotonga, which is the main island in the Cook Islands, that's around 26 square miles of land. 20 miles around the island, or 32 kilometers to get around the island, and we're a population of 18,000. But we have many, many Cook Islanders around the world we have them come home for special occasions during Christmas periods or around the New Year's. So that kind of gives you an idea in terms of where we are, who we are. And when someone talks about, what is the culture like in the Cook Islands? And I always say, we are a Polynesian people. Our culture is very similar to French Polynesia. They have the influence of the French speaking, and we have the influence of the English speaking. But we have our local language is Reo Maori. That's our local language in the Cook Islands. So kind of give you an aspect of where the Cook Islands are. And I think the one thing that makes us so unique is that we're still undiscovered. We're still a place that isn't heard of as much as like Hawaii, Fiji, or Tahiti, which makes it such a unique place to be at for us to really tell our story about the Cook Islands.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something that's really exciting. As someone who's worked in the travel and tourism industry in North America for a long time now, people are always looking for that destination that's undiscovered. A lot of people talk about Africa and going and on safari and all of that kind of thing, but if that's a long way to go. If you're on the west coast of North America, the Pacific is right at your doorstep, and there's this thousands of islands waiting to be discovered. So I totally agree with you, Christian. I'm going to jump into it here and throw a question to you both. There is a local story in Aotearoa this week. It's election time in New Zealand, and one of the local parties, the Māori Party, is proposing to rename New Zealand to Aotearoa should they be successful in the election. Aotearoa being the Māori name for New Zealand. And that reminded me of last year. The news was kind of going around the potential renaming of the Cook Islands. So to both of you, could you enlighten us about the history of the name and how did we end up being known as the Cook Islands?
Seeing as I'm the elder, I'm going to give the opportunity to the younger to go ahead.
What I say is, when people ask me about, the Cook Islands were discovered by, Captain James Cook, and I actually say, well, he did visit the Cook Islands in 1777. It was actually in the island of Vachu. But what I say is it was discovered by the people of Polynesia. And the name of the Cook Islands was, I think it was a Russian explorer tour. You might want to talk, you might have a little bit more knowledge about this. Had named the islands, previously used to be called the Hervey Islands prior to Cook Islands, which I believe was the southern group of the Cook Islands. And then it was found on the Russian maps that these 15 islands were grouped together and called the Cook Islands, named after Captain James Cook.
That's right. And the Russians wanted to honor Cook because no islands or no countries had been named after Cook, and so they decided that they would give the honor to Cook and name these islands after Captain Cook. When it comes down to our Polynesian heritage and our ancestry and who we are as Cook Island people, there started to be a movement towards wanting to have a Cook Island name for our country. So, and this has come about because many other islands right throughout the Pacific have changed their names. You know, the New Hebrides is now Vanuatu. Wallis and Fortuna Islands, or Gilbert and Ellice Islands, is now Wallis and Fortuna. Many other islands throughout the Pacific have changed because they wanted to have this identity to their heritage. And this pretty much is the way the Cook Islands is moving. But in saying that, there's 15 islands in the Cook Islands. 3 of them are uninhabited. And every one of those islands wants to have one of their names as the name for the Cook Islands. And so it's not an easy way to go about it. So they're going to the chiefs of the Ariki of the island, they're going to the orators of the island, and they're getting them to all come together to come up with a name. There was at one stage the name Avaiki was being thrown around, but then a lot of other Pacific islands were a bit up in arms that somebody was going to call themselves Avaiki, but I don't think that's going to happen. So we'll wait and see.
It is interesting. It is interesting because we try to recognize and remember that we are not homogeneous people. We are tribal people, and we all have our differences even within ourselves. And so when you try to categorize things into a box, it's a very difficult task. But, you know, hey, that is the world that we live in, and it's an interesting process. And I think the world is watching with interest because it's not very often that you see a country changing its name. Quite interesting to see. I am very interested also in the name Hawaii because our viewers will be familiar. Last month we talked with our friends in Tahiti and who also had a similar name. And obviously in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we reference Hawaii as well. Hawaii is a term broadly found throughout Polynesia, but I have found that each of us has a slightly different understanding of what it is. From a Cook Island perspective, or from your perspective, where is Hawaii and what does that mean?
Yeah, Hawaii is at first, without going into it, at first, Hawaii was thought to have been Raiatea until after some observation and studying of the chants and the songs of the Cook, the old songs, we found out that Hawaii was a spiritual place of origin. It wasn't specifically set to a place. Some canoes came to the Cook Islands from Hawaii, but the Hawaii wasn't Raiatea. Hawaii was somewhere in the Marquesas, somewhere in the Tuamotus. So after going through these songs and chants, it was found that the majority of the time, the elders were referring to the place that they originated from and calling that their Avaiki. That's their Avaiki. And it starts to make sense after a while.
I think so. I think we all originate from somewhere. And that kind of leads quite nicely into my next question, which is to talk about the origin story of the Cook Island people. And just one note, Christian, I've muted you just because we had a bit of feedback. But if you unmute, you can unmute yourself if you need to.
Yeah, that origin story is asked of me many a time. People say, well, where did the Cook Island people come from? Did they come from Asia, or did they Southeast Asia, or did they come from the Americas? And because they want an answer saying we came from here or we came from there. And my response was we came from both, but just not at the same time. With all the geneticists, the genetics, and all the studies that have been going into, all the academics from the different universities have been putting in studies, have found that we originated in Southeast Asia. The migration came down through the Philippines, through Taiwan, and down into the Philippines, where the migration stopped in the Philippines and Indonesia for about 2,000, 3,000 years. And this all happened about 7,000 years ago. So then from Indonesia, it went into the Bismarck Archipelago, which is just above Papua New Guinea. And it came down in through the Torres Strait Islands, and then it stopped there for another 1,000 years. And as this was all happening, the genes were changing as the migration was happening and the intermixing of different populations. Then we dropped down into Melanesia through the Solomons and down into Fiji. And then when we got to Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, the migration stopped again for another 1,000 years. There was no more voyaging. And again, at that time, the genes were mixing. And after about 1,000 years, they finally got the genes right. And all the good-looking people went to the Cook Islands. Sorry, I couldn't help it. I had to throw that one in. So the first migration came through from Samoa. Some canoes didn't hit the Cook Islands. They went straight through to the Marquesas. Some canoes came through the Cook Islands and on up into Tahiti, and then up to the Marquesas, and then further on to Hawaii, to Easter Island. And then the migration from the Marquesas back through Tahiti, through Raiatea, came back into the Cook Islands again, and then eventually the migration down to Aotearoa. But not all the canoes that left French Polynesia hit the Cook Islands. Some of them went straight past. Some ended up in Fiji, some ended up in Samoa, and some ended up down. And there's not just 7 canoes. There are many, many canoes that arrived in Aotearoa, as you know. So in that sense, the Cook Islands was the transit point. We were right in the middle. And all the canoes came through the Cooks to go to the east and through the Cooks to go to the west. And which is why we have so many similarities to the cultures of Aotearoa, of Tahiti, of Samoa as well. So for us, the Cook Islands people, that is the migration theory is we came from both, and we carry the genes of both sides of the Pacific, but we're in the center, and we're pretty happy about that.
It's a very unique position to be in, being in the center of the universe. And I do agree, all the good genes were left in the Cook Islands. So, Christian, I want to jump to you, and I want to talk about the importance of the Cook Island culture as it relates to tourism today. Does the Cook Islands play a major role in the tourism of the Cooks?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's important for us to always set expectation. Because, I tell people, the Cook Islands isn't for everyone, but it is for someone who wants to discover the Cook Islands. I think that is important to think about when we are telling our story, is that, everyone is pride people when it comes to owning their own land or owning something. And in the Cook Islands, the one thing that, that is very close to us is that you have to be a Cook Islander to own land in the Cook Islands. You have to trace back your genealogy to make sure that you have rights to pieces of land in the Cook Islands. So no land can be sold to foreigners. It can be leased, of course, but only for a certain period of time. But we like to take care of our islands. We are in the center of this very large ocean. So the things around us, we need to take care of that. And we help explain that to our visitors. When you are coming to the Cook Islands, come as a visitor and you become what we call a manatiaki, someone who will look after the land. We take care of it. We want you to take care of it as well. And we have different ways of doing those things. And when it comes to being mindful, we have information here and there before arrival, just in terms of propers. It comes to dress code when you are walking around the town area or public areas. When you are going to church, we say go and explore this, but speak to the locals. The locals will tell you what to do sometimes, or give you tips on how to do things or be proper around the islands. And it's something that we always promote as part of the Cook Islands. You want to tell them the truth and what it is. Obviously, we use these beautiful images because that's we want to take care of our lands. We want it to look like this for many, many years.
Absolutely. And I think it's just so important wherever you go in the world to be respectful of the home people, and that is their home. You are visiting their home, and to take guidance. But what I do find, especially with our Cook Island family, is they are very, very friendly, and even when they're disciplining you, it's quite friendly.
Yeah, they have funny ways of of humor down in the Cook Islands. And it's one thing is when you do arrive in the Cook Islands, we are very open people. When you are walking down the street or the road, we will stop by and ask you where you're going and if you want a lift, or we will ask, where are you from? Where are you coming from? And what are you doing on our islands? It's just a normal conversation we would have. And, there are times when we say, hey, why don't you come home, meet my family, and have dinner with us, or have a lunch, an underground, the oven, the omu, and see how we prepare our own food. That's just normal, I guess, the way we live is, we have open homes, and we welcome people, to our home. So we tell them, look, don't be afraid when someone asks you, hey, where you going? Do you want to ride? I'll take you there. It's just totally normal for us to do that.
It's not very normal here.
Yeah, exactly. It's not normal in the US. Yeah.
People will look at you a little bit funny if you ask them to come home for dinner. But that's what I love about our destinations, is that they're so real and honest, and that it is what it is. If they're asking you home for dinner, that's exactly what it is. There's nothing else, sinister or anything like that. Christian, it is a very beautiful place, and you've got beautiful beaches, beautiful people. But we do live in a pandemic. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. I have a question for both of you, and that is, how has COVID-19 affected the Cook Islands from a human perspective, but then also from a travel perspective?
I'll probably talk to the travel perspective. Right now our borders are closed. We are a small nation. We don't have the advanced, I guess, health systems as countries like the USA would have. We rely on New Zealand, so it's very important for us to really safeguard the people of the Cook Islands, and by doing that is closing our borders. We have lifted parts of it where we are having Cook Islanders or permit holders. They're allowed to return to the Cook Islands with a 14-day quarantine. In the Cook Islands, we're COVID-free zone, so we don't actually have COVID. But we are prepared for when it does arrive. And our preparedness is by designating, we call it punas, villages or health centers. And we have 10 located around the island of Rarotonga. And those punas are responsible for their villages. When it comes to people who require medical assistance, you have an assigned doctor or nurse for that village. if you require prescriptions, instead of going up to the public hospital to get your prescriptions, you organize that through the puna, so containing it. And I think we're used to being prepared. We are islands that, we are prone to cyclones coming through the Cook Islands. So, we know that's part of life, and we are prepared for natural disasters like this. But because of this pandemic that we are in, not only have we created these punas around the islands, we've also dedicated towards our Cook Islands promise. And that's our commitment as an industry to safeguard the people of the Cook Islands, our businesses, and our people from COVID-19. Is it tough in the Cook Islands? Yes, it is, I think, financially. But we have our land and our seas to help us. The government has been very helpful with assisting a lot of the local businesses because, tourism is a big part of our industry in the Cook Islands. So we're doing everything we can to get the message out to the wider community around being prepared, safeguarding yourself, social distancing, good hygiene practices. And we're actually in the middle of training a lot of the businesses to become trainers, so then they can pass that message on to their workers and to their families and to their friends and community. So that's actually happening right now. We have a department called Destination Development as part of tourism who are going around the island of Rarotonga, and at the moment they're on the island of Aitutaki, sharing this news with the community alongside with like the health department, the Maraiora, as well as internal affairs. So we're working together to be prepared.
Not the beauty, but what has transpired from all of this is the administration side of the island is right on top of it, as Christian just shared. But there's the other aspect as well, where the people have gone back to grassroots to survive because there's no more money around. So the plantations are thriving. People are planting. The fisherman goes fishing. He comes back with his fish. He goes to the planter. He says, I can give you a fish if you can give me some taro and some greens. And they do that swap. The guy with the pig goes down to the guy with the fish, and they're swapping out. And it's all being done the old way. They're going back to the roots of what our culture is all about, and that is sharing, respect, and care. And this is something that always comes to the fore here in our islands of the Cooks, whether it be on the island of Achu, where Christian comes from, or whether it comes from Manihiki or anywhere. Everybody pulls together, and they, if we comes to the time that guests are allowed to come back to our island and the flights are flying again, nothing will change. People will keep on doing this because they're learning from it now. They're relearning. And anyone who comes to our shore is going to be made so welcome. It's going to be, they're going to be dying to grab somebody and kiss them when they get off that plane.
Well, that's definitely. I think I'll be the first one in line to get that kiss. Honestly, I love it. I love to hear that despite the world, being what it is right now, that we're going back to the old ways and sustaining ourselves, and that's kind of a beautiful thing to see that resurgence. And you two are a practitioner of a lot of those traditional ways of thinking and the navigation in particular. We talked about in the intro about your voyage from the Cook Islands to California. Do you want to let us know a little bit about the purpose of that trip and some of the goings on?
Absolutely. The voyage was called Te Mana o Te Moana, meaning the power or the wisdom of the ocean. And it was a flotilla of 7 canoes from Fiji, Samoa, Cook Islands, Tahiti, and Aotearoa. And what we were doing was retracing our ancestry, relearning the culture and traditions of voyaging canoes, like the one you can see in my background, and being connected to the environment and the everything that's around us. So we sailed to California without the use of instruments. We used the sun, the moon, the stars, the birds, the currents, the winds, the colors of the skies in the morning and night, sunrise and sunset. And we, from the Cook Islands, we went up to French Polynesia, to Tahiti, to the Marquesas, up to Hawaii, around the Hawaiian Islands. And then from there, we sailed on to California. Now, the voyage through the Pacific, through Polynesia, was based on our ancestry and cultural traditions of voyaging and navigation. When we left from Hawaii to go to San Francisco, it changed into a scientific voyage. We were going through the garbage patch. Our push on this voyage was to bring about an awareness of what the Western world and their ways is having an effect on our Pacific Ocean, which is our home. This is where our food comes from. So we sailed up to California and up into San Francisco, and the 7 canoes sailed underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And a lot of these kids that were on board these canoes had never been away from their islands before in their life and had only seen the Golden Gate Bridge on TV. So as we sailed into to California, it was great. It was a huge experience. There were helicopters and news teams out just videoing everything. And a lot of the Pacific Island people in the US didn't know that our canoes were coming. But the coconut wireless actually works in the US as well. The message was getting out to the people. So they came down to the beach to see the canoes arrive on that beach, because a lot of them had moved away from the islands. Their parents had moved away from the islands, and the children were born in the United States. They'd never been back to the islands. And all they could see was their islands coming to them. So they were curious, and they came down to the beaches, and it was a very, very emotional time for a lot of them when they could hear the songs, the drums, and the music coming from the canoes as we arrived onto their shores. So it was a great voyage. Traditional navigation is all about observation. It's observing everything that's going on around you, your smells, your touch, your sight, what stars are telling you, what the twinkle in a star is telling you, and how we can use that to determine direction. I tell you, after all the years of learning this old traditional art, I have so much respect for our ancestors and how brilliant they were, to a point where, some of the explorers that are well known, like Columbus, Magellan, and Cook, and all these people who discovered our islands, when they got there were people there already, but they discovered the islands.
Yeah.
And that becomes a talking point.
I agree. And you think that, in terms of European discovery, it was very recent. Cook only was, 250 years ago?
Yeah.
And yet we've been living there for thousands of years. So, yeah, I think your point is right. Who really did discover these islands? That's something that we talked about when we talked about Aotearoa, and the navigation to Aotearoa, is that it wasn't by accident, that this was a meaningful journey that was well thought out, well planned and executed. And we talked last month to the Tahitians, and we also talked about the fact that some South American, Native American DNA was found in the people of the Marquesas. And there's, lots of stories with trade between South America and Polynesia. But in the Cook Island oral history, is there, when you, just sort of referencing your journey up into California from the Pacific, does the Cook Island history speak of any involvement with the Americas?
Not that I know of, unless Christian has heard something from somewhere else. But there was always the travel was we either sailed to the west or we sailed to the east, and there was nothing beyond that. Like as I was saying, we were just the transit point, but we didn't. There's nothing in the charts saying anything about us going to these islands. I mean, to the bigger continents. But in saying that, on this trip to San Francisco, when we sailed down the coast of California, we called in to see some of the tribes there. So we were there with the Chumash in the Santa Barbara.
Yep.
Yeah, Malibu.
Malibu, Santa Barbara. Yep.
Yeah. So we went into Malibu with our canoes, but it wasn't planned. We pulled in, and their songs and chants and stories tell them of how they came from the ocean, but they don't know from where. It's just an account of them arriving on the beaches, but not knowing from where they came from. And if you go back to their old language, Chumash language, it's very similar to Polynesian. A lot of the words they use are the same words as ours. But over time, the language changes. So the old language, so when some of the elders were speaking the old language, we could understand what they were saying, and they could understand what we were saying if we would speak a lot slower in our own language, dialect. So that there shows that there may have been a connection at some stage.
Yeah, and I live locally and have some involvement with the Chumash, and I hope to ask them that same question about what is their origin story. Everyone seems to be connected somehow if you look deep enough as well. Tua, in terms of your navigation work, and if people were to come to the Cook Islands, how can they show support for your work? And is there a possibility for people to learn about traditional navigation when they're traveling to the Cook Islands?
Absolutely. The canoe that you see right there, Maru Maru Atua, is a national canoe. It belongs to the people. And the Cook Islands Voyaging Society is an entity, an NGO in the Cook Islands that operates this canoe on a regular basis and is open to taking guests to the island out on voyages, depending on the weather, just to go out and up and down the coast of Rarotonga. And someone is always on board there to share with them the stories of the voyages, to talk about the navigation. And if I'm there in the Cook Islands, I'm there with the canoe as well. And we go through this whole routine of who we are as voyaging people. But absolutely, many of the hotels in Rarotonga are aware of the Cook Islands Voyaging Society, and that they do run charters or take people out on trips for a donation to the society, so we can continue our work and to help out with the maintenance of the canoe.
Yeah, it's a wonderful skill, and it's just, I think we all need to be very thankful that we have the knowledge of people like you to hand down through the generations, because it is part of our identity as Pacific people, is to know how to navigate on the Pacific. And Christian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, I was just going to say, they are a non-profit organization, and a lot of the crew members are there who are part of the voyaging. It's all voluntary work. And it's one thing we say is, we talk to the Voyaging Society and look at days of when they can go. It's always based on weather. So yes, it is possible. There's also, but even speaking to them on the ground, you can also get that experience by doing something at night. And I think Tua used to do some of this when he was on the island, is that you go at different points on the island of Rarotonga where you can see some of the stars and use that as navigational point. So even without going on the maka and experiencing that, you can still get that knowledge by being on the ground and talking to someone in the society. So, yeah.
Beautiful. I have a funny story, and it's kind of unrelated, but I'm in the middle of doing some research into my great-great-grandmother, who led one of the first ever Māori performing groups from Aotearoa, New Zealand, to New York City in 1909. And they traveled from Wellington Harbour on the Manapōuri, and I'm learning about the journey that it took to reach America. And they say that they had an audience with Queen Makea in 1909 as well. So I'm looking into that particular story to see if we can find out more information about the connectedness of the Māori and sort of reverse migration, if you like. And I'm finding that particularly interesting myself. And when I'm reading the diaries and the accounts, they were on a modern day steamboat, and they talk about being seasick for the first time. And it's an interesting thing to me for Pacific people and Polynesian people who are used to living on the ocean. All of a sudden they're on this strange craft and they're finding this weird sensation of being seasick. That kind of struck me as being quite interesting. So yeah, I'm going to look into more information about the audience with Ariki Makea in the Cook Islands as well.
That's great. I mean, a lot of ships came through the Cook Islands, as I was saying earlier. It's a transit point, but you know, in 1909, I was there then. Feels like it.
Well, you're looking good. You're looking good.
Yeah, but in 1909, when guests from, or anybody, visitors from overseas came, it was always an honor for the queen or the king of the time, the ariki of the time, to make them feel welcome. And this is where we all learn from, is that the hierarchy of the time, it didn't matter who it was that came to their shores, they would come out with open arms and pretty much give them whatever they had on their land or on their table for them to eat, and to be able to sit down and have good conversation and make them feel welcome. So yeah, Makea is my ancestor as well, so it's good to know.
It's interesting, especially how the ariki, the chieftainship, if you like, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it is quite, it's patriarchal mainly. It's handed down through the male line. But what I have found interesting going back through Polynesia is that there are, in fact, very strong female ariki, very strong female chiefs. And that's something that's very interesting to me.
Yes, well, for us in the Cook Islands, it goes to the, well, it changed over time. Everything's changing as the customs change as well. Where, yes, it was from the ariki to the oldest son, but now it's to the oldest child, and which is why we have a lot of our ariki have been women, and they've led really well. They've with dignity and an iron fist.
Yes, there seems to be a common thread there somewhere. And you know, I will say we did have Te Ariki Nui Dame Te Atai Rangi Kahui, our Māori queen, and that's sort of sits aside, but generally we are a patriarchal society as Māori, Aotearoa Māori. I did have a question that came through in terms of how do we book the expedition work. Is it booked through the hotels, or what's the best way to book that?
Yeah, I always find it's easier to book it when you're on the island, because you know what the conditions are like, and when you speak through the hotels to get in touch with the Voyaging Society. tour?
Yes, that is the way to go. Because the hotel people know who to contact, or can find out how they can contact the Cook Islands Voyage Society, and they know that the society can arrange something depending on the weather. And just to touch on the Navigating with the Stars tour that I used to do, on tour with tour. If I'm back on the beach, we run it. And if I'm not there, then of course I'm trying to get my son to do it, but he's too busy playing rugby.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of you got to be lucky, and sometimes these opportunities will just be, if they're meant to be, they're meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that's covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else that either of you want to talk about? I'll ask the audience for questions. If you have any particular questions, send them through now. But to the both of you, do you have anything else you want to let an audience know about the importance of the Cook Island culture?
So you want to go ahead?
Well, as I was saying earlier, like French Polynesia and like Aotearoa, everything evolves around the culture of our people. And Taiari, he captured it pretty well when he says you pull in nature and you pull in the people and you end up with a culture. Very well said. And it's not like in the Cook Islands, we don't make up our culture, we live with it. And we have lived with it in a long, long time. And so what you see is the real deal when you do come to the Cooks. The way we conduct ourselves on the streets and the way we meet people, that's part of our tradition. And through Christian's office with the Department of Tourism, they've got the Manatiaki, they've got so many different ways of just pulling and bringing about this awareness of what our people are all about. And so if, for those of you in the United States, if you're looking for a place where nobody knows where it is, this is the place to hide. You can come to the Cook Islands, you step on the shore for one day and everybody will know who you are. But the thing is, it's an out-of-the-way place where you can just be yourself and not feel pressured about anything or anyone around you. It's you do what you have to do to make your life enjoyable on our little paradise.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more to that, it's exactly what Tua said is, it is little. Our islands are small, so where you stay, you're not secluded to an area that all the tourists stay here. Where you stay, it's like staying in a village. The places where you stay, there's small boutique properties and holiday homes, dotted around the island and dotted around the village. And when someone asked me, where should I stay on the island? I said, well, if you like the sunsets, stay on the sunset side of the island. If you're a morning person, you like to see the sunrise, stay on the sunrise side of the island. If you like some nice peace and quiet, on the south side of Rarotonga, around Titikavaka and Waimanga, those are nice places to stay. But really, it's just anywhere. And there's a lot of things around the island that makes it easy to get to. And I think that's one thing that people don't realize is just the ease. Once you're there, you're there. There's no other buses that you have to take to actually get to your final destination, or there's not another plane that you have to take. Or different to going to the outer islands, but it's just so easy to get around. And when you land, you actually meet the people right there and then. You have Jake Numanga. He has been around for many, many years, who plays at the airport. And he's on his ukulele and playing his welcoming visitors, farewelling visitors as they leave our shores. So you get that feel once you actually land on the island of Rarotonga. So yeah, it's
beautiful. We're getting questions through, but it's more about particular itineraries. So I'll send this through to you, Christian, as well. But I know we're talking about people and culture, but one of the standouts for me when visiting the Cook Islands is the food. You guys know how to eat. From the food cooked in the umu and the ruko and your beautiful salads that you have. And then I remember just going to the beach, and there's a shack there, a caravan, and the fish comes straight off the boat and in a tray, and they're chopping it up in front of your eyes, giving it a quick sear on the barbecue, and it's the best thing you've ever had in your life.
Yeah, that's one comment that I've heard from when a lot of visitors come to the Cook Islands. They'd never been to the Cook Islands before, so they didn't know what to expect. But when they got there, they could not believe the variety of foods that were available and how good they were. They said some of them, they even go to the point of saying, we can't even eat like this in New Zealand. And here you are in the Cook Islands, you've got all this food. And we sit there and we look at them and we go, really? Because we're used to it. We live with it every day. So when they come, even right from the gourmet meals right down to a simple hamburger. They say even the hamburgers taste better than in New Zealand. So it's a food paradise, yes.
Yep, as a Kiwi, I'll tell you, it is true. You eat very, very well, and thank you for your time, the both of you. Your knowledge is astounding, and it's very important that we help educate people to travel more responsibly down to your part of the world. And yes, borders may be closed for now, but when they do reopen, our hope is that people will be thinking of the Cook Islands at the top of their mind. Lots of wonderful messages are coming through to thank you both for your input. So I thank you very, very much. And I just want to say, if there's anything that I can do to help you, let me know. But if there's nothing else, remember to like us on socials, everyone. We get a lot of information that's through on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. It's all Pacific Storytelling, 2 words. And you get a lot of good information on there as well. If not, I guess haere rā, kia hoki mai anō. Thank you very much to the 2 of you. I really appreciate your time. And yeah.
Thank you, Renata. Thanks for what you're doing. And like you said, the Pacific people are storytellers. We don't lecture, we tell stories, because that's where you get the richness and the actual heart and soul of who we are. So it's good at what you're doing. Thank you very much.
Ka pai. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Christian.
Oh, I was just saying thank you for having this platform. I think it's a great place to have a platform to tell our stories, across the whole of the Pacific. So.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.